we've had about 20 minutes to half an hour of the autolyse process, where the flour, water and leaven have been just standing, getting to know each other. The flour's been absorbing some of the water, the gluten development has started, the fermentation process has started, the enzymes have been started to react. So a lot of magic has already started in this bowl, but now we need to move on to the next phase, which is called the final mix. Now, the one ingredient we haven't added yet is salt. So we need to put 20 grams of salt in, and we need to add the last bit of water. For the total recipe, we add another 50 grams of water. But if you are using a very refined, not a stone ground flour, or if you were using a cake flour or a Sasco flour, you know, any of those sort of off-the-shelf ones that aren't artisan baking flours, I would suggest that you don't add the full 50 grams of water. Start with maybe 10 and take it from there. You don't want your dough to be too wet. And especially if you're using cake flour, I think only add an extra 10 grams just to let the salt dissolve a little bit in the water. So I've measured out 20 grams of flour of salt, and I'm going to add that to my dough. And because I know my flour and I know that it can handle it, I'm going to put the full 50 grams of warm water added to this. Just measure. Again, if I was working with flour that I don't know, I might add the extra bit of water more slowly, bit by bit. But to save time, I'm just going to do it all at the same time. Okay, so now comes the mix. And this is probably one of the more difficult and kind of areas of the whole process that people have the most uncertainty with. Certainly for me, when I was reading recipes and blogs and things right in the beginning, there was a lot of vagueness about this part of the process. Now in Rudy's live video, he would have done this part of the process in his stand mixer with a dough hook. You definitely can do that. It certainly, you know, if you need this with the dough hook for 10 minutes, it's going to develop a lot of gluten, which is what you need for big bubbles. By definition, bread, you want bread dough to have gluten in it. Gluten-free bread will not expand in the same way or be as open and light and airy as glutinous bread with wheat flour. But in the artisan kind of tradition with sourdough bread, what they tend to like to do is to develop the gluten over a longer period of time than doing it all in one go in a mixer. So the method that Chad Robinson in his tartine bread book and most other books that you'll find will sort of suggest doing it by hand and developing the gluten over time during the bulk fermentation with stretches and folds and you know, a long cold overnight proof in the fridge. All of that time, the time that the flour has with the water, over that time you're developing gluten naturally. But it doesn't take away from the fact that in the beginning you need to mix properly to get your dough to start looking shiny and to start getting some structure in it. If you don't do that, it's going to be very difficult to manage your dough and shape it later on in the process. So this is how I mix. I've got salt, water in my nicely autolyse dough, and I am just going to start going for it. I like to get my hands in the dough. In the beginning it's a bit sloppy, but you know, it's not like a complete sloppy mess. And that's because my starter has a lot of integrity. My starter, you can't do anything with a starter that's not active and healthy. And if your starter is a liquid mess, you're never going to get a nice dough. So everything starts with that. And that's why those first few weeks of getting your starter to be happy and healthy are the most important. One of the books I read called Open Crumb Mastery by a guy called Trevor J. Wilson. He's got a very nice Instagram page. In that book, you know, he says that the two most important things for a good bread is fermentation and dough handling. And as starter bakers, those are the two sort of things that are most difficult to master, because you tend to be starting with a starter that's not quite as active as one that's been in a bakery for many years, sometimes even hundreds of years. Those bakery starters are so happy and healthy. They're kept in like special proving boxes that keep them at a certain temperature. They're fed, lovingly fed every day. I mean, they could bake bread with just looking at it. So the fermentation is quite tricky to master, and also understanding what a well-fermented dough looks like. So you can see it's starting to hang together, but it's not nearly good enough yet. So I'm not having that much dough on my hands. I'm just going to wet them a little bit just to keep, I clean the rim of the bowl. And I'm kind of trying to emulate what a mixer would be doing, but very, very kind of gently. So you see, I'm not a doughy mess. My hands are pretty manageable. I keep this little spatula in the water as well. So the more water you have, the better. I'm starting to feel it holding together. It's not a runny mess. So if you have a runny mess at this stage, you've probably added too much water too quickly. And you can carry on like this for, you know, 5 minutes or so. And I think in the beginning, it's certainly something that I didn't do long enough to kind of develop the dough a bit up front, because you need structure in your dough for it to stand, for it to sort of stand up and keep its shape when you put it in the oven. So this is how you create structure. You develop gluten, but you also distribute that gluten in your dough in a good way by stretching and folding. Okay, so I think that's looking good. I think we're ready to start our bulk fermentation. It's feeling quite tight, so I'm going to leave it for now, and in about half an hour or so I'll do my first stretch and fold and show you how that's done. Okay, my hands are not a doughy mess. I can scrape off whatever's left over, put it back in the bowl, and off I go. The kitchen's not full of dough. It's all good. It feels nice and soft and billowy, and I think we'll have a nice bread soon.